Hey viewers and viewers, my name is General Red Strategist and welcome back to Sir You're Being Hunted. So, time for another podcast style episode since I did the Looney Tunes challenge last time. Ooh, there's a couple of device pieces already over here. Hold on, let me go and get this one first. So yeah, we're just doing, bog standard playthrough of the game at this point. Once I just ramble about whatever topics are on my mind and all that. It is a Sunday as I want to record this, and actually I've got a recording session with Phil and Connor later. We're going to be doing a bit more Sir, which is going to be good. It's going to be good fun. We're going to be doing, hopefully, a bit more Amnesia, a bit more Sir, a bit more Escape the Backrooms and all that. Because the thing is, it's been a while actually since we had a recording session for those two other games, Amnesia and Escape the Backrooms. People are probably wondering, when's the next instalment of Voyage of Horror coming and all that? Well, don't you worry. Should hopefully be coming sometime soon, though I probably will need to re-watch the most recent episode of that, or last episode of that rather, sometime over lunch before the recording session, just to refresh my memory in terms of where we were actually at in that custom map and all. And similarly, I'll need to... Actually, I don't need to refresh my memory really about Escape the Backrooms. I think I remember where we were on that one, roughly. We sort of completed a whole area that looks a bit like a car park with a weird sort of monster that impersonates dudes in yellow hazmat suits. If you've watched the video, you know what I mean and all that. But yes, God, it is actually late January, incidentally, also, as I want to record this. January feels like it has actually gone really, really quick, oddly. Because usually, I mean, I may have talked about this before, but where I work, obviously being in an academic institution, whenever we start the second term in January, January always typically feels like a very long month. It takes a while to get through it, because usually it's just very busy with the amount of courses that are all sort of restarting up again, the amount of teaching needs to be done, and of course the amount of things like essay marking and stuff like that, which ends up taking a bit of a while, because, you know, typically what will have happened is that in the term prior, a load of people will have been writing essays, they'll have submitted them just before Christmas, and then of course when the new term starts, that means there's a huge marking burden to undertake. And, you know, to be fair, I'm not saying this month hasn't had its share of busyness so far, it has. I've had, you know, a few essays and things that have needed marking, whatever else have you. But I just feel like compared to previous Januaries in my current job, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's been as busy, to put it that way, which is good on one level. I think partly also because the sort of things I've been teaching this term have been, well, some of them have been quite hands-on, intensive, that have required me to be in at work for quite a while on certain days, so that just means less burden elsewhere, kind of. Just in the way, you know, that the planning team at my work actually allocate teaching duties to everybody. Right, if you guys could move on, please, that'd be very nice. Right, no, I didn't want to actually waffle on about work-related gubbins this episode. It's not what I had in mind. But, no, what I did have in mind was... do you remember a couple of episodes ago I mentioned I'd been watching a load of Izzy's videos on YouTube, the video essays, things like that? Well, I've been watching even more of her content because I just really enjoy it. I really like some of the video essays she puts out, especially the ones that particularly are to do with old sort of 2000s internet media and websites that people used to frequent, stuff like that from back in the day. Because obviously it's, you know, it's a bit of a nostalgia trip. Like she's got a video, for example, on websites like DeviantArt, for instance, because DeviantArt is a site which I can remember being a bit of a lurker on back in the day, and I don't think I ever really engaged with it back in that day, but I certainly remember, you know, sometimes going on it, and there'd be like cool fan works of various franchises and things from people who, you know, like the same kind of things as you do. You know, so I'd be looking at things like you know, Rayman fan art, things like that as a teenager and whatever else have you. And it was, you know, it was good stuff. Then, of course, in more recent years, apparently DeviantArt had a whole load of changes. It had sort of like a thing called Eclipse that came out, which I wasn't too familiar with. So I had to kind of basically listen in on what that was. And apparently also DeviantArt has a an AI art generation program, which has also got a load of people up in arms because it's sort of like that thing of, again, AI being trained on art that people may or may not have consented to be used in a certain way. But so there was that, and that was a bit of a nostalgia trip, admittedly. And there's other stuff that Izzy's has talked about, which I myself wasn't really familiar with. I never really engaged with, but I'm sure lots of people watching this probably remember. Like, she has a video on Neopets, for example, which, like I say, that's something that I never really knew all that much about as a teenager. It wasn't something I ever engaged with. But certainly, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people out there, possibly some of you watching this, who probably, are a bit more savvy with it, a bit more knowledgeable about Neopets and what it actually was, more so than I am. Or I was, rather. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. But, no, one of the most recent is these videos I watched. And, it was interesting because I'd had all these sort of nostalgia trips with some of her content. But then I watched one of hers, which was it was sort of looking back on a website in the sort of 2000s, which, I'll be honest, I'd never heard of myself, but apparently it was a big thing. Or, it was big in the sense of there were a load of dramas surrounding it. And it was kind of an interesting watch, because, it's easy sometimes to look back on things that happened in the past, especially things that you remember from your youth and all that. And it's easy to sort of look back on that with a bit of rose-tinted spectacles and to sort of think, oh, yeah, wasn't everything great? Wasn't everything better back then and all that? But obviously the reality usually is that, that's rose-tinted spectacles, and the reality usually is that for all the good things that you remember from back in the day, there will have been bad things as well, things that were just horrible or not very good or whatever. And so this Izzy's video that I watched, basically it was about a website called Sticky Drama. Again, like I say, I have never heard of that. I'd never heard of it, but I don't know why I ended up watching a whole video on it, and yeah, it was pretty shocking. Let's just say this. So basically, if you don't know what Sticky Drama was, it was basically, as the name says, a drama teen gossip site, something like that, from back in the day, sort of 2000s. Now, the thing about it was, and this may be a little creepy, it was sort of like a site that was all about teen gossip and drama, except I think it had been set up by a guy who was not a teenager, was an adult, which makes you immediately think, okay, right, I mean, I get it on one level. Obviously, the people who set these websites up are going to be, well, they're unlikely to be teens themselves, which is fine. But the problem was that the thing about Sticky Drama was, it epitomised all of the horrible, toxic culture of elements of the internet back in that day and age. And by all accounts, this guy who'd set it up was basically quite heavily involved in a lot of its dramas, and he basically set it up for the purposes of creating drama. And some of the stuff that pretty much happened on there, or that happened with people who were on there, is by all accounts utterly horrendous. So basically it's just like everything from discourse about serious issues being treated in a very toxic and flippant way. Basically things like, well, trigger warning here for quite serious topics, but basically all kinds of things to do with things like sexual abuse, misogyny, racism, just tackling it in a very insensitive, horrible manner that makes you think, good God, this is just awful. And apparently, there were certain individuals, usually young teenage girls, who were on that site who, were not exactly flawless beings, let's put it this way, but definitely who were vulnerable and who really needed probably therapy and support, not a frigging account on a drama site where their every little mistake could be picked over by random strangers and weirdos and creeps on the internet. So, Sticky Drama had a bit of a reputation, in essence, for all kinds of horrible shit. In fact, now I'm not 100% certain if I have got this correct, but do you remember in about, I think it was it 2008-ish? Well, maybe a bit after that, I don't know. I can't quite remember exactly. Do you remember a case from around about then of a teenage girl over in, I can't remember if it was in Canada or the States. It was in North America, somewhere. I think her name was Amanda Todd. And I do remember there being quite an internet furor about this at the time. There was sort of like an internet furor about the way she'd been treated online, because she eventually basically committed suicide. But there was a whole absolute freaking furor afterwards, because basically there was a lot of just verbal abuse. Obviously, because Amanda Todd had been horribly bullied prior to her committing suicide. And a lot of that obviously had been cyberbullying, it had been online. And the thing about Amanda Todd's case was, even after she committed suicide, there were lots of people who were just posting incredibly toxic, horrible things about her. And it was just really awful. And I'm not 100% sure if this is the case, but was Amanda Todd, did she have an account on Sticky Drama? And was a lot of that bullying from Sticky Drama, in essence? I feel like it was. Or I feel like I've seen people say that it was. So I would probably need to Google this, but yeah, that just gives you an idea probably of how bad it was. Basically just a lot of people on that site who were just toxic as hell, making horrible, edgy jokes that were very tasteless and nasty about things like abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, all kind, just about race, about, you know, just making misogynistic statements, all kinds of horrible shit, and sort of trying to like hide under the whole free speech, you know, free speech umbrella defence and all that, when it's like, no mate, this is not about your free speech, this is about the fact that you're just a douchebag and you're horrid. So yeah, I mean, Amanda Todd obviously was a tragic, horrible case, and it just makes you, it was a case that really exemplified the worst in humanity, just the way, like I say, that people were talking about her, not just before her death, but even after it. It was awful. Fortunately, Sticky Drama, I believe, no longer exists, though apparently the guy who set it up is pretty much trying to sort of generate crazy internet outrages even today, and is trying to, well, basically, he, as far as the Izzy's video made out, he basically has not matured or grown or changed in that time. He's still the same old drama stirrer. But you got just really thinking about, you know, that 2000s internet really, really was sometimes an absolute cesspit. Like, there was a lot of good stuff on there, don't get me wrong, but there was also a lot of stuff on there that was just horrible and vicious and toxic and nasty. And Sticky Drama, I guess, was probably one of the things that really exemplified that. So, yeah, it's good actually to have that reminder for someone like me, you know, so I don't end up having those rose-tinted spectacles. And to be honest, you know, I can't help but think that actually, the fact that Sticky Drama was the way it was, you know, Sticky Drama probably wasn't isolated, it wasn't a lone thing. Even in the world outside of the internet, you could still see elements of that happening, that just sort of, that, you know, toxicity and that reduction of people to horrible stereotypes and just abusing people who didn't really deserve it, that kind of thing. Because I think I've talked before, haven't I, about that Cat Icarus video I once watched quite a while ago now, the one that was about PS1 magazine or whatever it was. You know, the one, I'm sure you remember the episode I did in So Being Hunted. It was the one where basically I was talking about that Cat Icarus video where he talks about the old PlayStation magazine and how for a period in the 2000s it basically became the absolute friggin' lowest common denominator, bottom of the barrel, misogynistic trash, and it was awful. I've talked about that before, haven't I? Yeah, I definitely feel like, come to think of it, you know, that kind of ties in with this topic of the 2000s being just not a very nice period for that kind of thing. Yeah, because it basically wasn't just on the internet where that was happening. Because certainly I remember, like when I look back at my high school years, for example, in the sort of early 2000s, and I think about the kind of people I was surrounded by, there were lots of really cool people, don't get me wrong, but there were also lots of other people who were just, yeah, they were assholes, and I think they were, you know, kind of poisoned by that whole culture of the time. Oh, did I just trigger that guy? I feel like I may have done. You just back up, buddy. Yeah, but I mean, I could remember, for example, as a teenager, back in the early 2000s, I can definitely remember how toxic sometimes classroom discussions could be. And I'm not talking about teacher-led classroom discussions here as part of learning. I'm just talking about conversations between, particularly, schoolboys in the day, and how basically how they often did have elements of that toxic masculinity going on in them. And I know some people will probably sort of think, oh god, he's on about toxic masculinity, this is all going to be a bit woke for me. But I say, no, please bear with me here. Please do not write this off just because I'm using a word that may seem woke or whatever. I mean, I could probably talk about the reason why I hate people who use the word woke anyway, because they usually use it as shorthand for basically shutting down a conversation and not having to engage with stuff that they just personally don't like to talk about. But I'll put that aside, for the moment. I mean, toxic masculinity, when I refer to that, usually what I am talking about is just masculine traits that have been turned up to the 11th degree to the point where they are just uncomfortable and nasty and not very nice. So, for example, I would talk about something that, I really remember from my kind of teenage years, which is that quite often a lot of guys in my year group had that very sort of mentality of, you got to be tough. And, you got to almost be a bit belligerent sometimes. And, trying to really make out to each other how big of a, big shot they were. Pretending to be strong and tough and just oh yeah, I don't give a shit about you. And just insulting each other and things like this. And, on one level, there's a fine line between banter and that kind of thing. And sometimes, a bit of banter's okay between friends who know each other and are comfortable with one another. But the problem is there is a point at which that gets too much. Now, I always remember, some of the lads, for example, in my year group at high school, they had the emotional sensitivity of a brick. And, yeah, let's just say they were not very academically bright. And on top of that, they were very much those kind of guys who went around trying to almost sort of like prove to the world how tough they were. And it often just got them into absolute trouble, and the rest of us would just look at them and think, God, what are you doing? Seriously? Shut up. That kind of thing. But yeah, that is one of the sort of things I'm referring to with toxic masculinity. That constant need to try and have to prove to people how great you are. Particularly in terms of physical, oh, I'm tough, I'm physically strong, and all that. And it's like, no, you're not. You're 12 years old, shut the fuck up. But yeah. And, when I sort of look back, obviously, on the kind of conversations that typically these sort of groups of people would have in high school, and you think about some of the jokes and things they would make about women and, gay people, for example, you think to yourself, good God, yeah, it could be pretty nasty at times and horrible. Like the way that sometimes some of these young lads would speak to girls, for instance, was just like, dude, stop. That's horrible. Why would you talk to her in that way? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about with toxic masculinity, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm referring to. But yeah, I feel like I look back on the 2000s and yeah, I do remember a lot of stuff like that. It was awful. And so, sticky drama and things like that, that was just that, but in the online sphere. And yeah, it could be nasty, because I look back on my high school years. And, like many kids, obviously, I had my share of bullying when I was a kid. Absolutely. Many kids did. But I'll be honest, I didn't have it as bad, I think, as some other kids that I recall from my year group in high school. I do remember, and I can still picture her face to this day, one girl who was in my form group at high school, who I can recall her being there like the first couple of years, but then after like the first couple of years, she kind of just like vanished because I think it was because basically she had just been so badly bullied by, but well, really by a combination of some of the girls in our year, but also quite a few of the guys. She'd been so horribly bullied that she basically just stopped coming to school. I can remember. I can still picture her face. I think I don't know. I think ultimately, I assume she probably went on to a different school, and I would hope that she had a better time of it there than she did at the school I was at. Because good God, yeah, I feel bad for her. I do. I really do. Because the thing is, I know this is going to sound very defensive, but I mean, I myself never participated in any of that bullying, but I will say this, as a 12-year-old kid, I sure as hell never stood up against it. I never said anything. I was just awkwardly silent. And to be honest, I think a lot of kids probably are the same way. I'm not trying to justify the fact that my lack of action over that kind of thing as a kid, but I am trying to explain why so many kids probably don't speak out about it. Because when you're 12 years old, I think it is hard to stand up sometimes on principle against things, especially if, there's a whole group of people who are badly behaving. High school peer pressure and the desire to socially conform can be real big pressures, and they can affect your behaviour in ways that outside of that situation you look on and you think, God, why am I doing that? Why did I do that? Why did I make that decision? Or why did I not say something or do something to try and speak out against certain forms of behaviour or whatever? And Lord knows, as an adult, obviously I look back on that now and I think, good God, it was awful. I should have said something. And I imagine many people out there have that same thing. And that's fine. That's good. If you are the sort of person who looks back on your teenage years and you look back on horrible things that were happening to other people in your year group and you feel that sense of guilt that maybe, you think, I should have said something, or I should have gone to a teacher, or I should have spoken out against it, but I didn't because I was young and lacking confidence. You know what? That's fine if you feel that way as an adult, because that shows that you've grown as a person. It shows that, you do have a functional moral compass deep down within there. And Lord knows, as an adult now, I do think that, as someone now in my 30s, I am more confident in myself as a person, knowing that if I was faced again with a situation where I felt like there was something happening like that was unfair and nasty, I am more confident now as a man in my 30s that, I would say something about it. I wouldn't put up with it. But that is just sometimes the way it goes, I think, ladies and gentlemen. Like I say, kids, when you're young, you lack confidence. And the need to socially conform, peer pressure, that kind of thing, they can be really nasty. So, I think my experience is by no means unique to me. I think a lot of people will have experienced that kind of thing. But yeah, sorry, this got very deep and quite personal all of a sudden. But yeah, I just thought it was a fascinating topic to look back on the 2000s. And for all the good things that were there, it could also be very toxic at times in certain respects. And I am kind of glad that, we have moved away from that over time. And, I am glad today that there is a lot more awareness, much more widely speaking. I'm not saying it's perfect. There is still a long way to go. But generally speaking, when I look at where we are today in 2025 compared to where we were in the 2000s, I do think, generally speaking, there is a much, much greater awareness and sensitivity among people towards, just not being a douchebag to people. For example, not being a douchebag to women, not being a douchebag to LGBT people, etc., etc. I'm not saying the world's perfect. There are still people out there in the world who want to go back to the 2000s. And, some of them do absolutely wield a bit of power and influence on social media and whatever else have you. But generally speaking, there are plenty of voices who are speaking up against nasty behaviour. And I think generally, we are headed still in the right direction for the time being in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I wanted to sort of end on a slightly more, a slightly more optimistic note. I think. I don't know. I don't know what other people's views are. I'm sure people probably have their own thoughts in the comments and all that. Okay, right. I'm going to wrap up here because it's lunchtime for me now. So, social media links, propagandist channel link, etc., etc., all down in the video description for anyone interested. If you enjoyed, a like is of course always appreciated. But other than that, I'm going to sign off. And next episode, hopefully, me, Phil, and Connor coming in to have a big chat and all that. Goodbye, everybody. Was that somebody? Was that civilians? Alright.
Titan formation! Rally on me!
Okay, may as well just keep more. Me at the moment. Is that the girl who Frankie was with? It could possibly be. I just see glimpses of them. Sort of escaping through the tunnels. Is she gonna get killed? What the hell? Not just a random tunnel going off down here? I can't go through there, it's an invisible barrier. Alright, with me, down the... Ooh! What the hell was that? Jesus! Is this turning into a fucking horror game? What is this, freaking Doki Doki Literature Club? Are you gonna freaking...